Hello. I am supposed to be filming my 6-month check-in for my no-buy year right now, but honestly my brain is kind of emotionally very burnt out. It's been a hell of a week, obviously. It's been a hell of a couple of weeks, to be honest, if we're being real, especially if you live in America. And so I just, I just got out of the shower, I threw on a smidge of makeup. It's a really dark and stormy day outside, so I have no idea what the lighting is doing in this room right now. But I basically just kind of wanted to film a very chill, low energy, low effort, low mental strain, no thoughts, head empty kind of video, As Canada Day passes and 4th of July weekend in the United States kicks off, I am just not in the mood for some really intense thinking and ruminating and reflection on how the past 6 months of not shopping have gone. So instead, I am here to present you some very shallow, no thoughts, head empty, look at this cool shit I have content that does not require me to do any real emotional labor or work, because I'm just gonna talk about some books that I recently acquired. Now you might be wondering, Prachi, aren't you on a no-buy year, and didn't you include books in your no-buy year? How exactly did you come about these books? Did you cave over the mental and emotional strain of the past couple of weeks in the news and break your no-buy year and buy some shit? No, I didn't. What actually happened is that there was a conference in Toronto called ISPPD. It's this huge conference on pneumonia and pneumococcal disease. And for those of you who may not know or may not remember, I work in public health in the field of vaccines. So I initially wasn't going to go to that conference, and then somebody got COVID and canceled last minute, and they kind of had the seat anyway. And so my boss and coworkers were like, Prachi, you're originally from Toronto. We have all of this stuff paid for already. You want to come? And so I went. And it was great. It was not only great from a work perspective, because I feel I learned so much about pneumonia, pneumococcal disease, and the PCV vaccine, that's the pneumococcal conjugate vaccine, which is given to both really young people as well as older folks in the United States and other high income countries, but it's mostly given only to children in other parts of the world. So not only did I learn a lot from a work and academic and health point of view, but it was also really nice to be able to see all of my coworkers in an out of work context. But it was also just great to be back in Toronto. Toronto is my home city. It's my favorite city in the world. I definitely want to move back there one day. I am proud to be a Canadian, and no more so these past couple of weeks. But basically, the reason why I'm introducing this is that while I was in Toronto, I met up with a couple of my friends, and one of my friends, who I actually went over to her house one evening for a brief dinner, she had this huge pile of books that she had decluttered throughout the pandemic that she still hadn't gone to any sort of bookshop or library to donate. And so she basically offered, she was like, Prachi, if you have room in your luggage, feel free to look through my stack of books to be donated and take whatever the hell you want, because she and I are both big readers. And a kid in a candy store, I kind of went wild. The luggage bag that I traveled to with in Toronto, it was one of those bags where there's two halves of the suitcase that you have to fill in, and one half of the suitcase was almost entirely filled up by these books. So I have 10 books in front of me, and 9 of them are used books that I got from my friend, and then the 10th book is a book that I actually got for free from my library. So I'm just here to kind of talk about what the hell it is I got, because once again, we are doing a chill video, no thoughts, head empty. So without any further ado, let's get it. So I think I'll start with the one book that I have that isn't a used book that I picked up from my friend, and that is this right here. This is a mass market paperback of The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead, and this book actually won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction a couple of years back. Now, any book that wins the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction always perks my ears up, because one of my favorite books of all time, The Hours by Michael Cunningham, is a Pulitzer Prize winner. So there's some part of me that sort of inherently trusts the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, but I've just generally heard really good things about this book. It is, just a heads up, it's a slave narrative, as the title would suggest. It is about a young slave in Georgia called, I believe, Cora, who joins up with a young man to escape her life in the plantation. But the twist that this story has is that whereas the real life Underground Railroad was a metaphor, there was no actual railroad, in this book It's imagined to be a real, actual railroad, tracks, trains, and all. So I got this book because the Enoch Pratt Free Library in Baltimore was actually giving away free books as part of their like summer reading program. So for anybody living in Baltimore, like if you go to the Pratt Library and you sign up for their summer reading program, you get a free book in June, another free book in July, and another one in August. And they have like a huge menu of books to pick from. So the newest Isabella Allende release was on there. So was People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry, Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, Circe by Madeline Miller, The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson, who wrote Caste, Harlem Shuffle, which is Colson Whitehead's newest book, and The Underground Railroad. I asked the librarian there whether she recommended that I read The Underground Railroad or pick up Harlem Shuffle instead, and she personally recommended that I start with The Underground Railroad first because it's Colson Whitehead's most famous, most lauded, most awarded book, and then if I like this, I can come back in July and pick out Harlem Shuffle and then read that. So that's how I picked up this book, and I haven't read it yet. I meant to. I was about to like pack it into my case when we like went to Toronto, and then I accidentally like left it on my bed. So I was unfortunately not able to read this book, but I am very, very excited to dig into it. And now let's move on to the 9 books that I picked up from my friend's donation pile. So my friend actually has a very similar declutter philosophy to me, which is that if she reads a book, even if she really, really likes the book, she will often declutter it if she doesn't think that she's going to read it again. And she actually has like one really tiny bookshelf that she calls her Hall of Fame. And then she has one slightly larger bookshelf that's filled with all of the books that she wants to read. And if she reads something from her wants to read bookshelf and she doesn't think it deserves to go into her Hall of Fame, like the books that she thinks she's going to read and reread for the entire rest of her life, she will just declutter the book. So she will just periodically like sell all of the books she doesn't want to enter into her Hall of Fame to the used bookstore, or she'll donate them to the library, or she will let me come in and root through her pile of books to pick out shit I like. So if I'm gonna be like 100% honest with you, a lot of these books I picked up purely because of like vibes and hype. You know, like maybe I'd heard somebody talk about them, or I thought they looked interesting based on cover and title alone. So I can't really talk to you that much about these books, but I will just show them to you because again, we are here for no thoughts, head empty content, and that is what I'm delivering today. So first off, let's talk about a book that I have actually heard about a fair bit before I went to my friend's house, and that is this. I just realized I don't actually know how I'm supposed to pronounce this book name. I am Indian, but I don't know if it's supposed to be Shantaram, 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 Shantaram. Like there's many variations on what this word could be. And unless I see how this is spelled in Hindi, like I have no idea how I'm supposed to pronounce this. So my apologies. So from what I'm given to understand, it's about like an Australian man in jail who breaks out of prison, escapes to India, and then suddenly gets involved in like the underground gang world in Mumbai. This novel is, I believe, a fictionalized account of Gregory David Roberts' actual life. Now, Gregory David Roberts is a white man, and I was a little bit on edge the very first time I heard that synopsis, but I've actually heard like multiple brown people in my life talk about this book very positively, so I picked it up out of her declutter stack. Next, moving on to a different kind of Indian, we have Five Little Indians by Michelle Good. So this is a Canadian piece of fiction, and it actually won a whole bunch of prizes in Canada. Like, I think it was longlisted for the Giller Prize. I can't remember if it won or not. Okay, it says it was longlisted for the Giller Prize, and it won the Governor General's Literary Award. So Michelle Good is herself First Nation. She belongs, I think, to the Cree. She's a member of the Red Pheasant Cree Nation in Saskatchewan, and she actually has a law degree after 3 decades of working with Indigenous communities and organizations. She also got an MFA in creative writing at UBC. So clearly like a very, very impressive woman. And from what I'm given to understand, the story follows 5 different First Nations women, and it's about the trauma of like residential schools, which literally like stole First Nations children from their parents in Canada. So I'm not sure how like pleasant or fun of a read this is going to be, but I personally have been making it my mission to try and read more like First Nations literature out of Canada, because I just realized like that is a blind spot in my own sort of historical understanding of Canada. All of Canadian history is actually like a blind spot because unfortunately I went to like middle and high school in the US, so I know a lot about like American history, not Indigenous American history, but like white American history. But I don't know anything really about Canadian history at all, up to and including like the way in which Indigenous people were treated. So I just in general been trying to read more Indigenous voices, and when I saw this and I remembered like how lauded and hyped this was, I picked this up. So similarly, I saw 2 other pieces of like Canadian First Nations literature in her like declutter pile, and I just snapped those right up. So the other book that I saw was Green Grass Running Water by Thomas King. I have no idea what this book was about, but I saw Thomas King and I just knew I immediately had to pick it up because I really enjoyed his book, The Inconvenient Indian. It's actually on my bookshelves over there. It's basically like a broad, sweeping kind of like non-fiction book that picks out some like key themes in Indigenous history in the United States and Canada. And it was a great sort of like primer, I don't actually know, on like First Nations history in Canada. Thomas King, also obviously a First Nations man. I have no idea what the hell this book is about, but if it's as well written as The Inconvenient Indian was, I'll probably have a good time. According to the side blurb, Alberta, Eli, Lionel, and others are coming to the Blackfoot Reservation for the Sun Dance. There they will encounter 4 Indian elders and their companion, the trickster Coyote, and nothing in the small town of Blossom will be the same again. Sounds like a fun time, and it looks like it was also nominated for a bunch of awards, so looking forward to reading this. And then the last piece of First Nations literature that I saw in her pile that I picked up is Johnny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead. My friend was like, Prachi, you like have to read this book, because she had just read it and she was like, I cried so hard, but in the best possible way. Like, you need to read this book. Read this book. And she was so adamant about it. I didn't even ask her what it was about. I was just like, yes, okay, I will read this book. As you can see right here, like it also won or was nominated for a lot of different awards. The back of the book says that "You're gonna need a rock and a whole lot of medicine" is a mantra that Johnny Appleseed, a young two-spirit indigiqueer and NDN glitter princess, repeats to himself in this vivid and utterly compelling debut novel by Joshua Whitehead. Off the res and trying to find ways to live, love, and survive in the big city, Johnny has 1 week before he must return to his home and his former life to attend the funeral of his stepfather. The 7 days that follow are like a fevered dream. Stories of love, trauma, sex, kinship, ambition, and heartbreaking recollections of his beloved Kokum, that's grandmother. Johnny's life is a series of breakages, appendages, and linkages, and as he goes through the motions of preparing to return home, he learns how to put together the pieces of his life. Johnny Appleseed is a unique, shattering vision of Indigenous life, full of grit, glitter, and dreams. And I believe Joshua Whitehead is himself, according to the back of this book, two-spirit. So I'm really excited for this, because my goal this year is to like find more queer person of color voices. I'm kind of like a little bit tired of like white queer narratives, I say as I'm literally reading a book called Girls Can Kiss Now, written by a white lesbian. But anyway, those were 3 books that I picked out from my friend's declutter pile that were all written by like First Nations authors. All 3 of these books are like such quintessentially Canadian books that I don't know how famous they are outside of Canada, but I'm like really eager to dig into them. Speaking of things that I don't think would be very famous or well-known outside of Canada, this is Scarborough, a novel by Catherine Hernandez. Scarborough is one of the suburbs of Toronto. It's actually in the eastern part of Toronto, and it's probably one of the most like culturally diverse parts of Toronto. Like, people from everywhere live in Scarborough. And my friend who actually lives in Scarborough, she read it and she really liked it as well. She felt like it was a really good like encompassing of the way that Scarborough is. Even though this is like a fictionalization of Scarborough, it's not like a non-fiction collection of short stories. And because I'd been like complaining to her that I felt super like homesick and that I missed Toronto a lot and all this kind of stuff, she was like, Prachi, read Scarborough, take it with you, like, have a good time. And then the next 3 books that I picked up are books that I have, like, heard hyped up, that she just happened to be decluttering, so I was like, ooh, let me pick that shit up. So first we have On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, a novel by Ocean Vuong. I feel like everyone and their mother has been obsessed with this book, has already read this book, has laughed and cried and sang this book's praises, and I'm like late to the train of praising Ocean Vuong. So Ocean Vuong is a Vietnamese American poet who is, I think, gay. He's definitely a member of the Alphabet Mafia in some way, shape, or form. And this is his first novel, and I think the entire novel is framed as like a letter to his mother who cannot read. As a fellow Gaysian immigrant, I feel like the story is gonna make me cry. And you know what? I'm ready. I am ready to have my heart ripped out and build back together, and I hope that you cannot hear the thunder that is happening outside. It is truly getting kind of nasty looking out there, like Thor is having a grand old time. So anyway, the next book, also by a Vietnamese author, also super duper hyped up, and also, like the Underground Railroad, winner of the Pulitzer Prize, we have The Sympathizer, a novel by Viet. This is disgraceful. I should figure out how to pronounce these names. Editing me will cut in with like the proper pronunciation of this person's name. Like, let me put some respect on this Pulitzer Prize winner.
Hello, it's editing me. I am editing while lying down in bed, so don't judge me, but his name is pronounced Viet Thanh Nguyen.
Multiple people have told me that I need to read this book because I have frequently complained to anybody who will listen about just how overwhelmingly boring and white spy fiction is. Like, I'm tired of Ian Fleming and John le Carré, and I say this as a person who, like, has a deep and undying love for the TV series The Night Manager. Did y'all see that lightning? But, I mean, like, I'm just kind of, like, I'm tired of spy stories that are just written by, like, white people going to exotic places. Graham Greene, I'm fucking looking at you. Like, we had to read The Quiet American when I was in high school, and I remember as a teenager just kind of being like, what the fuck is this, you know? Like, why am I reading this right now in the year of our Lord, like 2010? And for all of the people in my life who have heard me give that rant out to them, they've all been like, Prachi, you need to read The Sympathizer. This is the book that you are looking for. So that, plus the fact that the narrator is apparently like a communist double agent, that's all I know about this book. I don't know anything else about this book, but you know what? It's enough. It's enough. I'm intrigued. I definitely will read this. And then the last book I picked up that I, like, obviously knew what it was, and I picked it up because I'd, like, heard so much about it, and I'm like, bitch, I need to read this book, let me pick it up, is The Palace of Illusions by Chitra, Banarjee, Divakaruni. This is a South Asian contemporary classic. Like, if you are even vaguely into South Asian literature, you've heard of this book. And it's honestly kind of a hate crime that I, a South Asian who loves literature, have not yet read this book. I don't even own this book. I own a lot of other South Asian contemporary classics, and ironically, I own Chitra Banarjee Divakaruni's less famous book, The Enchantment of the Forest, but I, like, don't own her most famous and iconic and classic novel, The Palace of Illusions. So this is a retelling of the, like, iconic Hindu epic, the Mahabharata, from the perspective of one of the women, Draupadi.
Hi, just realized maybe I should, like, explain the Mahabharata a little bit for people who, like, don't have the context. The Mahabharata is an incredibly, incredibly long text. So I believe a recent translation by Bibek Debroy consisted of either 8 or 10 volumes, each of which are about 400 pages long. So it is this huge, incredibly long text that is, like, thousands and thousands of years old. It's one of the sort of, like, foundational texts in Hinduism, and it's basically about this family that goes to war with another family, and most of the book is this very prolonged war. And if I'm going to compare it to anything in the, like, Western literary canon, I think the best comparison would probably be, like, the Iliad, which is also about war, but you know how, like, the Greek gods are intimately involved in the war? It's the same way in the Mahabharata because, like I said, it's a religious text. So it's not just about these, like, families fighting each other, these kingdoms fighting each other. It's also about, like, all of the gods getting involved and giving all these sorts of speeches and inspiring people to fight and blah, 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 blah. Most people, even very devout Hindus, never read the entire Mahabharata in their lives. Most people end up only reading one, like, sub-book of the Mahabharata called the Bhagavad Gita. I personally have never read the Mahabharata. My memory of it is, like, entirely based off of this really old TV series that I watched as a child, but it's mostly like a bunch of men swinging their dicks around alongside swords, if we're gonna be honest. But if you were gonna make an argument that there exists a female protagonist in the story, that protagonist would unquestionably be Draupadi. She was this very revered and interesting figure. She pulled an Uno reverse on the idea of polygamy and instead decided that she was single-handedly going to marry 5 men, 5 brothers, the Pandava brothers, and unfortunately, her husbands are fucking degenerates, one of them more so than the other, but most of them, let's be real. And I mean that literally, like, one of them is a degenerate gambler who literally gambles her dignity and virtue and all that shit. It's a really, like, pivotal moment in the story. Krishna, one of the gods, swoops in to, like, save her, and the fact that she isn't humiliated leads to her, like, degenerate gambler continuing to being a fucking degenerate gambler, getting them all exiled, and eventually she, like, low-key, high-key, like, instigates a war. So, as far as female characters go in the original Mahabharata, like, she's it. Like, she's the big mama. She is the most important person. But make no mistake that Mahabharata is, like, mostly about all these men fighting dumb, boring battles. And that's kind of why the Palace of Illusions is so intriguing, and it ended up being a classic, because it basically took this woman who plays a really pivotal role in the war and yet is kind of like sidelined in the narrative of this like huge sprawling war epic, and it makes her the protagonist, and it becomes this sort of like feminist text.
And, like, I need to read this. My South Asian card will be revoked if I don't read this. Like, I need to read this. I'm very intrigued by it. I love, like, feminist retellings of classic stories from the point of view of, like, the women in that story who are kind of initially marginalized and sidelined. So I feel like I'm gonna really enjoy this book. So the last two books that I picked up, and the thunder is getting kind of out of control, and I'm also realizing I'm like sitting in near darkness because of just how stormy and apocalyptic it looks like outside. You seen that lightning? So I will wrap this up super quickly, but the last two books that I picked up, I'm gonna be honest, I picked them up purely because I thought the cover and the title sounded really interesting. It was just straight up... Okay, that one was really close. Sorry, that lightning strike was like really fucking close. But so the first one I picked up was The Heart of Redness by Zakes. Again, I'm gonna need to look up how to pronounce this person's name.
Hi, I did a little bit of sleuthing on YouTube, and his first name is pronounced Zakes, one syllable, Zakes, and his last name is pronounced either Mda or Mda. I heard it both ways.
Mda is actually like a really, really famous South African writer. He's not as well known in the West because, of course, when Western people think of South African literature, they think of J.M. Coetzee and Nadine Gordimer, holy shit, who are both white South Africans. And in fact, the publishing industry in South Africa was for a very, very long time, arguably still kind of is to this day, like really centered on kind of like publishing like white voices over black ones. Mda is like a really, really highly regarded and influential South African author, and I had like heard his name thrown around in literary circles before, so when I saw this, and when I saw the title, which is The Heart of Redness, which I want to say is probably an allusion to The Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, which I found to be also an absolutely fucking buck wild book to have to read while I was in high school. Also, look at how pretty that cover is. I don't even know if you can see it because it's gotten so damn dark in here, but I just kind of like picked it up. I was like, you know what? Let's do this. Let me pick up this book randomly and start reading. The back says, Kamugu, recently returned to Johannesburg and disillusioned by the new democracy, moves to the remote Eastern Cape. There, in the 19th century, a teenage prophetess commanded the Xhosa people to kill their cattle and burn their crops, promising that the spirits of their ancestors would rise and drive the English into the ocean. The failed prophecy split the people in two, with devastating consequences. 150 years later, the two groups' descendants are at odds over plans to build a vast casino and tourist resort, and Kamugu is soon drawn into their heritage and their future, and into a bizarre love triangle as well. Let's fucking go! Very excited to read this. Just picked it up because it sounded spicy and interesting and fun. And same goes for this, which, okay, let me, holy shit. That was a long burst of thunder, but let me turn on the light. So this book by Anchee Min is called Becoming Madame Mao, which, like, what a fucking title, what a fucking cover. You know, like, I was just like, oh my god, okay, I need to read the back of this book and, like, see what the hell this is about. And the back of the book says, from the best-selling author of Red Azalea, this extraordinary novel tells the stirring, erotically charged story of Madame Mao Zedong, the woman almost universally known as the white-boned demon, whom many hold directly responsible for the excesses of the Cultural Revolution. Bringing her lush psychological insight to bear on the facts of history, Min penetrates the myths surrounding this woman and provides a convincing, nuanced portrait of a damaged personality, driven by ambition, betrayal, and a never-to-be-fulfilled need to be loved. With all the compressed drama and high lyrical poetry of great opera, becoming Madame Mao is a remarkable accomplishment. Madame Mao is finally given her own voice. That last little bit is an excerpt from the famed author Ha Jin. Given that bonkers synopsis and title and cover, I was like, okay, I need to read this. Whatever the hell this is, I need to read this. I hope this is good. I want to like read a little bit about her like real life biography, I think, before I dig into this novel, so that I have some sense of actual historical context versus like the stuff that Anchee obviously made up, because this is a novel. And that's everything. That is my like giant ass pile of books, which as I'm looking at it now, I'm realizing I can't fucking count. There are 11 books here. I picked 10 books out from my friend and then the one library book. But anyway, these are all of the books, and let me give myself a bit of an arm workout holding these up. And if you have stuck with me all the way to the very, very end of this video, thank you so much for watching. And as always, I hope you have an amazing upcoming week. And even if the rest of the week is messy and imperfect, I hope that you're still able to create and experience some truly beautiful moments. Thanks for watching. Bye.